Welcome to the Peace Catalyst podcast, where we share stories to inspire, uplift, and encourage you in your peacemaking journey. I'm Becca Tybel, and I'm joining you all from Rzeszów, Poland, where I'm visiting my husband, who's here working on humanitarian relief efforts. And as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Ali Bernison.
Hey everyone, I'm Ali, and I am with Peace Catalyst in Los Angeles, California. Although currently I'm in Washington State because it is a long weekend. So if you guys enjoy the Peace Catalyst podcast, rate and review us on Apple or wherever you listen because it helps others find us. So it boosts our visibility and encourages others to give us a listen. So thank you guys so much for doing that. This week, we are chatting with Andrew Larsen, who's a longtime friend of Peace Catalyst and a devoted peacemaker. Andrew has worked as a consultant to churches and nonprofit groups seeking to understand the other, particularly Muslims. He empowers peacemaking initiatives through photography, building relationships, and growing a network among Muslim, Christian, and advocacy groups to build bridges between divergent communities. Working with Serve Globally of the Covenant Church, as well as Peace Catalyst International, and as an ordained minister, Andy has hosted peace feasts, multi-faith dialogue, and advocacy for the vulnerable in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He is also part of the Sila community, which is committed to the contemplative life, taking time to pause on purpose, to nurture the reflective life with Jesus in listening prayer, solitude, and other disciplines to cultivate the strength and perspective necessary to sustain a life of outward service to others. So we had such a great conversation with Andy. And I'm so excited for you guys to hear more about his trip to Iraq and his conversations with prominent Muslim leaders. So there's a lot to get into in this episode.
Yeah, I can't wait for you all to hear it as well. And I really appreciate Andy's just journey of, going along to places that are uncomfortable or foreign or distant in order to let himself be stretched and grown and also bring that back home with him too. So it's really cool to hear his some of his lessons in peacemaking. And I think just want to encourage all of us to listen with open hearts and open minds, and can't wait to get into this episode. Before we do, we just have a quick peace quote to share. This is a quote by author Rebecca Solnit. It says, "Pilgrimage is premised on the idea that the sacred is not entirely immaterial, but that there is a geography of spiritual power. Pilgrimage walks a delicate line between the spiritual and the material in its emphasis on the story and its settings through the search. Though the search is for spirituality, it is pursued in terms of the most material details. Or perhaps it reconciles the spiritual and the material. For to go on pilgrimage is to make the body and its actions express the desires and beliefs of the soul. Pilgrimage unites belief with action, thinking with doing, and it makes sense that this harmony is achieved when the sacred has material presence and location." Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us today on the podcast. We're so excited to hear from you and your story and your journey of peacemaking. Wondering if you'd mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and your journey of getting to where you are today as a peacemaker, as a follower of Jesus, and as a spiritual leader, among many other things.
Yeah, sure. Just by way of introduction, I'm an ordained minister. I serve with our denomination in the MENA region, which is Middle East, North Africa, but I'm also kind of in a hybrid position where I'm based in the U.S. and do a lot of engagement with I prefer to call a multi-faith, principally Christian Muslim sphere. So we call it peacemaking. I'm very much familiar with the PCI um, kind of approach to this work, and love it. Have collaborated with PCI over the years, but also do a lot of work in Israel, Palestine. And then I just came back just a few weeks ago from a trip to Iraq, where I visited many of the important shrines, and I think we'll talk about that later. Um, Shrines that are important to the Shia tradition, but also a lot of Sunnis are very keen and interested in some of the places we went. So just a lot came out of that. It was very hot. It was 120 degrees several days, and I'm from the Northwest, so it was a little overwhelming. Um, Maybe just another quick piece about how I came into this. I think that's part of your question. I was I was serving in a church. I was a pastor of a church when 9/11 occurred, and I felt this manifestation within our church of Islamophobia, which is just an kind of an extreme, manufactured in some ways fear of Muslims and of Islam in general. Sometimes it showed up in a softer version, it kind of creeped into people's attitudes and kind of their heart fears about what's going to happen if Muslims come into our neighborhood. But sometimes that was, I found, a more edgy and definitely angry version of this fear towards Muslims. So I just felt responsible, kind of as a spiritual leader, pastor in that community, to begin walking in that. But I knew very little. I read the news, and I'm a reader, so I knew some stuff. So I just started visiting mosques in our area. But interestingly, I think I showed up the first time at a mosque on a Wednesday, and only the caretaker was there. So he told me to come back on a Friday. When they gather for prayer, that's their big day, middle of the day, and I could meet the imam. So I just started to do that. I came into that, wanted to just be a good neighbor to begin with. As a pastor, I would say, I'm here to learn. And then that just began to grow. There was a sense of, I was leaning into that. I felt this reciprocal need from Muslims in our community to lean into who I was and the general community, but also the church, because they'd heard much about kind of ideas that were expressed by some of the leading evangelical voices, especially that were kind of negative. So that grew, began to visit the mosques regularly, built friendships with the imams, and then began to take groups from our church to the mosque and just begin to build some of those relationships so that we would respond not out of fear. That's kind of how he emerged. And I've been doing that now since about 2002 or three.
So you touched on this a bit, but so you recently returned from Iraq, and I'm very interested. This is my first time meeting you, speaking with you.
Mm-hmm.
So and I'm sure the audience is very interested to hear a bit about that, how long you were there, what the purpose of your visit was, what you gleaned, what you're bringing back with you.
Yeah. So I've had a burden since about 2003 for the country of Iraq, and one of the mosques that I visit is the Shia community. So I knew generally that places in Iraq were important to the Shia community, but I also knew that Iran was part of that in terms of where the leaders would go train, or kind of who they follow in terms of their thinking about how they should practice their faith in today's world. So definitely interested, but burdened by how the U.S. Involvement with the country of Iraq, leaned in a certain direction. And 2003 was, what they called the shock and awe campaign in Baghdad to remove Saddam Hussein. A lot of the stuff is being said of weapons of mass destruction, which I had a suspicion at the time that it was an incredible posture. But anyway, just trying to work through all of that back in the early years when I was doing this, just felt burdened. Just this deep, deep sense of unease in my heart about what was happening in the country and a lot of the collateral damage. So what often happens in international relations is, powers, world leaders do stuff, and we don't count the they use the word collateral damage. It's just initially when there was deaths in what we were doing there, we would count the deaths of American soldiers, but not the Iraqis who were also victims of what was happening. That's a long introduction. I went to the mosque here locally a couple of years ago during Ashura. Ashura is the Arabic word for 10. And they do, according to the lunar calendar, every year they celebrate, or it'd probably be better to say memorial service on the martyrdom of Hussein. Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet. He was the one that many thought should be their leader. At different times in the first 50 years of after the Prophet's death and the story of Islam, but he was martyred in 680 in the desert of Karbala, which is present-day Karbala in Iraq. So the first time I went to that, I didn't know what was going to happen. There was a ceremony, and then what they do is it's really kind of hard for the Western person to understand what's going on. But they're in this deep lament over the martyrdom of Hussein. They beat their chest. So I was in the prayer room and with over 100 other worshipers who were praying, and they're just beating their chests in unison and wailing and crying and remembering and telling some of the gory details of the martyrdom of Hussein. So it struck me as very, very, I just didn't know what to make of it initially. And, but began to learn and understand more the importance of lament and just the story of trying to answer the question in the entire world of Islam was they were trying to figure out who it was who should lead them after the death of Muhammad. And there was disagreement on that. Okay, so fast forward, that was several years ago, and this opportunity came up. I've been wanting to go to Iraq for some time, but it was recommended that I not go just because of security issues and being American, obviously all of those issues. But this tour came up. A friend told me about it. Actually, the imam in this particular community connected me with a group that was going. So I went during the Ashura ceremony when they celebrate that in the country of Iraq. And there were estimates of 5 million people in the city of Karbala. And I didn't see any other white men during this event. So it was combination mosh pit going into the shrine in Karbala, so the shrine is where Hussein's mausoleum, or his grave is stationed, and they built this incredible mosque / shrine over that burial place, and pilgrims go there every year during Ashura to commemorate, to remember, to mourn the death of Hussein. So some of my Sunni friends watching all of this were a little uneasy with it because there's huge disagreement. But I'm in this as a Jesus follower, and what I call equal opportunity peacemaker. So that's kind of my word to my Sunni friends. But we were there. I was there for almost 2 weeks, visiting shrines with a group of Shia pilgrims. But they were mixed. They were from many places around the world. And the leader of our tour was, he's a scholar, professor of Islam. And yeah, we were in the thick of it for that whole time. There's other things that happen, but I can talk about some of those pieces after there's more questions.
Yeah, I'm curious. So I know that you had met with a particular Shia leader. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that meeting was like?
Yeah, sure. So it was wild. There was a lot of theater, and I'll try to tell some of that, but not take too much time because I know you want to get to the substance. But so Sistani in the Muslim world is the leading cleric. He's the most important leader, thought person, spiritual guide for the whole Shia world, both within Iraq, but even outside of that. And some of my Sunni friends also respect him for who he is, for how he's lived his life. He lives in the city of Najaf, which is kind of has become the center in many ways, important ways, kind of like would be maybe the Vatican for, at least for Shia Islam, but also others find him just important. He's 92 years old, so he's been around for a while. He's one of the clerics with a turban, and it's important to understand that he has created some space that is different than the Iranian version of how the clerics carry themselves in the world, how they influence politics in general. And the Iraqi model is actually probably a little more careful about how they position themselves within that constellation of influence and of government. He tries to be neutral, would be my perspective. And but he also has been very, very keen on, especially in the early years when we were involved as a country, the U.S., of not allowing the encroachment of foreign powers to influence and shape what happens. But not as radical and not as angry towards the Western presence. Although, of course, during what we did there was very difficult. And number two influence person in Iraq would be considered more of a radical firebrand, but he's been influenced, in my perspective, more and more by Sistani. So that would be Muqtada al-Sadr. So anyway, we were teased with the possibility of being able to see Sistani, but didn't know it was going to happen. So I kind of went. We're on spiritual pilgrimage, visiting these shrines, and then they had to do some finagling, but we got a day or morning with Sistani. So here's what's happening. We go up to his. It's a humble house. I think he even rents it in the city of Najaf, maybe half a kilometer from the shrine to Ali. And we're on the street, kind of like the curb. There's markets and shops. And they said we had to take everything of value and potential security risk off of our person. So belts off, shoes off. I had to take my wedding ring off. Could not even have a business card from the hotel we were staying in my pocket. None of that. So we took all those items off, and then we're standing there kind of waiting for our turn to go in. But there's crowds of people because they know this is Sistani's house, and people want to get in to see him or to get a blessing, something. And then our tour guide, a young docent guy, he's about 30 years old, goes, "Oh, look!" And he's pointing down the street to, there goes Muqtada al-Sadr. that this guy, he's got this black turban, he's walking with this, he's got a gait. Have you ever seen a video or news clip of Sadr, Muqtada al-Sadr? He just looks like a man on a mission. He looks a little angry, maybe, to the typical Western eyes. And he was walking in just right past us. But he had an entourage of probably 10 security guys around him because his life is threatened. His father, who was an important Ayatollah, was assassinated during the Saddam years. So there's just all kinds of dynamics at play. But we're standing there, and there he is. He's walking into Sistani's house. And apparently he was having a meeting with Sistani before we got in. But there we are. And while we're waiting, we look, and there's this car, this important car that's backing up on the curb, and his chauffeur is there, and it's surrounded by more security guys. One of our tour guys took a picture, and they just got furious. It's just security, high tense security. So there were 3 rows of security people on the curb between us and the walkway into Sistani's house. And then behind those people were Muqtada's security detail. And behind that, there was another 3 rows of Sistani's security detail. And I'd never experienced anything quite that tense. I've been in a lot of places in the world, but nothing quite that crazy. But it came time, they opened up. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. We were able to walk in. But people from the street were just pushing in. They wanted to get in. We got through. We got in then there was an airport security screener we had to walk through. They frisked us 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 different checkpoints. Just the process to get into Sistani's house. But we got in. They served us coffee in a side room, and then they finally filed us in to have a session with Sistani. And so it was our group, only our group, about 20 of us, Sistani's staff, the managers, a lot of men in suits, a few with turbans, and just this drama. But there is Sistani sitting on the bench, the corner bench, the same place where the Pope sat with him last year, 21. I think it was in November. And he's 92. And we were all struck almost immediately. He just started sharing from his heart. He was definitely a spiritual leader. He had this aura that was just humble. He talked about praying for us as a group, about praying for situations and people in the world. And just this wisdom and hard-earned spiritual insight just was pouring out. One of the guys in our group who has become a friend, Iqbal, who, by the way, his mom is Shia and his father is Sunni. So, there's such a variety of Muslims in the world, and family situations. We shouldn't ever put them in one bucket ever. That's just, you can't do that. But he said, what are the most important things from your long life of, just leading the community that you could share with us? Most important life lessons. There was a quiet, pregnant moment. We're all just kind of wondering, what is this man going to share with us? So he said 3 things. Number 1, it says, be good to all people as they are your brothers. And he gave a little footnote to that deeply impacted me. He said, even to those who don't agree with you, be kind and be good to all people. That was the first one. And then he said, help those you encounter as much and in whatever capacity you can. So he said, be in the community, be not just in your enclaves, so be in the place where you can help and support those in your community. And then lastly, he said, cultivate a good character. That was a rough translation of kind of the ethical, the akhlaq, something. I'm probably mispronouncing the Arabic. Um, so good ethics in how you interact with people. So that was just like wow. Um, they were managing. His staff was managing his time. Of course, he's old. He tires, but that was the end of our session. They ushered us out. Our tour leader looked at me and he goes, "Wow, that sounded a lot like Jesus to me." And our tour leader does some interfaith work in Toronto, so he's conversant in kind of my world. And I was with this group as a Christian. They all called me the Reverend. It was kind of fun. They had lots of questions about who I am and what's the difference between a priest and a pastor, and we had a lot of conversations through our time together. But when we were filing out, the staff, they picked me out of the group and they held me, and I wasn't sure what was going on. I wasn't afraid because it just felt hospitable, but I was picked out of the group. And he said, wait here. Then the tour guide leader who could help kind of interpret and translate some of the stuff that was being said came over to me, and he helped kind of officiate this. The staff wanted to know who I was, why I was there, what I was doing. But it wasn't, like a series of intimidating questions. They were just curious. And so we said, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm a pastor, minister. I'm here to learn and to pay respect to your leaders, to understand more. And immediately the guy reached out and grabbed my arm. And there's this thing they do, at least in Iraq, but also in Palestine, put the hand to their own chest. And it's like this greeting of warmth, affection, and kind of leaning in. And I was just struck by their hospitality and their warmth. And they were impacted that I was there. So I said, wait a minute, just before you leave. He went in a door, came out and gave me a ring. They gave me a gift. So I have a ring now that's only fits on my pinky finger. I have to resize it, but it's a ring from Sistani because of my visit there as a Christian.
That is so, yeah, it's just so cool to hear about your experience, and to just imagine what that must have felt like being in the room. And probably he had such a captive audience, I can only imagine. So was there any time for dialogue then, or question and answer, or was it, yeah, just curious about the feel, or was it kind of just Sistani sharing and the crowd
Yeah.
kind of listening? And
A little of Q&A, but not a lot. It was more initially the members in our group were asking for prayers. So it was like, and there's this sense that he's a very holy man. He's close to God, and he has some influence, with God. So a number of people in our group were asking for prayers, special intercessions. And this is framed in the whole pilgrimage, the Ziyarah, which is kind of what they term this period. So they're there with a deep spiritual, purpose for their journey. So they were connecting with the holiest in their tradition and asking, for his prayers. But that one question did come, and he spent some time with that. I wanted to talk at some point, but I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't want to embarrass myself or my kids. But it struck me that even as, maybe for your listeners, that we don't always know what we're doing. We just don't, or what to say. But I was deeply struck by the ministry of presence and showing up. That communicates so much. It communicates to our friends that we respect their journey, that we want to be with them and learn from them. Because you need to know and understand that, they experience the back end of Islamophobia, of this negative caricatures and things that are said that are just really horrible. And so, for a white man, an American white male, to show up in that space, just I don't even have to say anything. It just says so much. But I thought a lot afterwards, like, what would I have said if I actually had the courage to say something?
Yeah, absolutely. Which totally makes sense that it was more of a time to absorb and listen,
Hmm.
and be present. I really like how you said, just the ministry of presence is, yeah, quite profound. Showing up,
Hmm.
and making space for others to share their experiences, especially such a prominent leader. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, as you have had time and space to reflect, what has come up for you, maybe even, um, well, from your experience in Iraq, but then also with what was shared, what Sistani shared. Is there
Hmm.
anything that you've come to reflect on personally in your own faith and walk with, um, God, or anything that you've taken with you, or that's really stood out to you?
Yeah. I think a number of things are, and some of this is stuff I've been doing for a while, but was just really kind of underlined with greater clarity, perhaps, and a deeper conviction because of this trip. Number one is showing up. Um, Also, when there's this concept that's called holy envy, and there's even a great book by that title, Finding God in the Faith of Others. And there's this the deeper you go, the greater connections I'm finding with my Muslim friends. They have a relationship with God. It's very clear. Um, People like our tour leader and then also Sistani, who are well educated, have some idea of who Jesus is. Obviously, that theologically we disagree on that, but if you come into that presence in a way of listening and wanting to learn, being teachable, those conversations have always been ironic, really positive for me. And the more I listen, the more questions then come up to me. So questions like when I'm just with the group, they want to know, so what does a pastor do? um, and the question of who Jesus is actually comes up in our understanding, and being able to tell some gospel stories is always welcome. It's not something that's resisted. Obviously, there's certain ideas that they have of Christianity that I'm able to correct at a certain point. But one of the principles in this concept of holy envy is when trying to understand another religion, it's important that we ask the adherents, the people who practice that religion, and not their enemies. So, too many times I hear people kind of spouting off, this is what Muslims believe, and they're so called experts. And sometimes they may speak Arabic. Um, but they don't really know Muslims. They're reading it from often a really negative view. So that's a big part. And a second concept is don't compare your best with their worst. So I really try to talk about more of a Sistani as opposed to the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran, who's belligerent and spews out hate speech towards Americans. Um, and then I leave room for respecting what they bring into my life. One of the big things that comes to me all the time is Muslims have taught me that correct faith, must be followed by right behavior. So sometimes we try as Christians to get our doctrine, our viewpoints all squared up really well, but we fail many times in translating that into our behavior and our ethics. In Muslims, that's more integrated. So that's clearly a thing that has impacted me. I've been invited to preach quite a bit, and I often try to bring an experience into that. So people aren't just sitting listening to me, because that can get boring, but to somehow create a link or a bridge to their local Muslim neighbors. So one of the big things PCI does that I picked up early was peace feast. We'll go to a restaurant or a place of eating that's either owned by a family from the Muslim world. I go ahead of time. I sit down. I meet either the manager or the owner of the restaurant. Often it's a family-owned place, and I ask him a few questions. Where is he from? How he got here? What his story is? And then, after I build that initial bridge, I will bring a group from my church, and then we call it a peace feast. So, and I'll tell the owner, the manager, we're coming. It's a group from our church. We want to sit down and eat and enjoy your food. And that again is just seeing them. Their food is often it's part of their culture and part of their pride. And you honor them. You honor them by eating their food. So the hospitality is so important. But then I'll invite, when I'm there with my Christian group, I'll invite the person that I met to come and sit with us at some point. And I'll kind of do a little impromptu interview, ask them some questions, and then open it up for people at the table to ask questions. It's just those kinds of things of building connections. And then those people, they know the place, they know the owner, they can come back anytime. And I encourage them to come and patronize the restaurant and just become friends, just be in the community, get to know them. Sometimes we build a program around an event, an incident, something that's happened, and we reach out, but we need to do more grassroots stuff just to have those relationships ready made. So if something happens, we can call up our friend and go be with them, stand with them, advocate for our Muslim friends in the community. But I also like to take groups from churches to the mosque. So I do that a lot. And usually the imam will give us some time after the time of prayer on Friday, lots of questions and answers. And part of it is too often what we do in the church is we flip what John says in 1 John, that perfect fear casts out love. And we need to disciple people in perfect love casts out fear. So just building those kinds of connections is really, really vital and important. I will just say one more thing, that this trip, my trip to Iraq, helps me understand a lot more some of the Sunni Shia tensions that are pretty raw still in lots of places in the world. So it helps me understand that, the conflict in Yemen, that's a Sunni Shia thing. Some of the conflicts in Lebanon, there's a layer of this Sunni Shia tension there. Obviously between Hezbollah and Hamas and southern Lebanon and Gaza, those are tensions that are quite raw, and sometimes they manifest. And one of my Sunni friends, actually a leader in the Sunni world, has asked me for help to bridge to the Shia community, because he has caught the vision of what we're trying to do. He calls himself a Muslim peacemaker, even a follower of Jesus, and he doesn't have many Shia friends. And so my objective is to help kind of build that.
Would you say a bit more about that and what it's like or what it might be like if this is something that you're about to do, to engage in peace building or to catalyze peace when you're kind of on the outside or outside looking in? Obviously, you are a follower of Jesus. You're neither Sunni nor Shia. So
Yeah.
what what are the dynamics there and things that you might be thinking about or sensitive towards?
Well, I can step into some of those places, especially in the Sunni Shia thing, and not be rejected initially. They know me as a peacemaker. They know me as someone who loves Muslims and has respect among Muslims, and so I can step into either of those communities, and I do quite a bit. So that's one role we can play as people who are somewhere in the breach between those communities. And Jesus did that. So that's we're how he brought some of his disciples into Samaria. I read those texts now the narrative, the travel narrative in Luke 9, beginning in 9:51, I think it is. That's when Jesus began his journey back to Jerusalem. And initially, he took his disciples into Samaria. Usually they didn't do that. They would circumvent Samaria because they were the hated kind of half-brothers and the religious heretics of their time. And John and James and John, the brothers of thunder, they wanted to call down thunder on Samaritans when they didn't offer hospitality to Jesus and his group, and Jesus rebuked them. So anyway, I could go on that rabbit hole for a while. The the I think if you are in that space long enough, Muslims don't suspect that I'm there to try to convert them. I can play a role as a bridge builder and a peacemaker, but also it's just really, really fun. Initially, I was evangelized quite a bit, but I keep coming back, and I haven't converted to Islam, although in many mosques they consider me a Muslim because I yield to God. I'm committed to Jesus. So I create confusion in the mosque sometimes because I'm not pounding them with my good news, but I create confusion in the church because I'm not pigeonholing Muslims. That's kind of a caricature of what evangelism looks like sometimes. But I'm living with them, loving Muslims in my deeds, and sometimes that's not enough for churches. So, Becca, I know you're on this, but I'm trying to. I feel it's really important for those of us in this journey to recenter really the practice of Jesus in peacemaking, and it's too often an adjunct or something that specialists like you and I are given permission to do, but it's not considered as central. And I'm reading more and more and understanding just the New Testament that so for instance the word peace appears 100 times in the New Testament, and we limit it to personal peace with God, very little to do with how we relate to our neighbors. So I'm trying to recenter this peacemaking as central to Christian discipleship. It's not something that just you and I get to do.
More on the peace feasts, I'm curious to hear. I've never formally participated in a peace feast, but I've heard a lot about them and the effectiveness, if you can measure effectiveness or call it that necessarily. But yeah, so I'm interested to hear more from you on that, and particularly what you've observed. What some, if you've noticed any attitude changes or anything,
Mhm.
just what is the church's, your church, your local church, your local community's experience with that?
So some of the byproduct, which is very important, and it kind of there's ripple effects across um, a church community if they're involved in this, but more broadly, the wherever the it touches, to normalize our Muslim neighbors. So when something happens, if you don't have a relationship, you don't know a Muslim, we're susceptible to interpretations of what happened, who did that, who are the perpetrators, what is their intent. The people ask, Sharia law, what's that going to do to our freedoms and our democracy? Those kinds of questions. But if you know a Muslim, you just kind of say, well, no, that's not what Muhammad thinks. That's not what Ahmed believes. He's not that way. He's an American citizen. So that's a big piece. Of course, there's a variety of Muslims and ways in which they believe they are to live in the U.S., for instance. But you begin to help people not be susceptible to the stereotypes that feed Islamophobia. So it's a little bit like the issue with Black Lives Matter or racism or any of those isms or phobias that we are susceptible to. When you know somebody, you can immediately just kind of correct that, and then it changes how you behave as well. And then as we invite people to do that and say, this is what we're supposed to do as followers of Christ, it picks up some momentum, and you begin to see them, more people being creative on how they build those relationships. So we've done other things. So we've done listening events. So where we in a church will host a group, and we try to pick a particular group that has a story to tell, and we host them. We just do a potluck or some kind of food, and we invite them to tell their story in a church community. We've done that with the Bosnians. We've done it actually with Uyghur communities. I've done it with Palestinian issues because I'm deeply involved in Israel-Palestine. And sometimes there's a little more content. So they're telling a little more of their story, and those are very powerful and helpful. It changes both communities. So Muslims are less terrified. They know they have allies. And then we are less afraid. And it's hard to know, just one person, little old me here in Olympia or Seattle, or you in Poland. What can we do with the current situation? So we were there for 2 weeks. We came back, and then of course this last week there was quite a bit of conflict and shelling. So in Iraq, there's huge influence from Iran, and there's different models on how they, as Shia Muslims, position themselves with the local government. Iran is more of what we call a theocratic model, so the clerics are shaping more kind of what the country of Iran does. But if you watch the news and understand a little bit more what's going on, that is falling out of favor, especially with the young generation. There's quite a bit of kickback, but it's still the model in the country of Iran and some of the leading clerics. So Iraq is their neighbor, and though they're smaller, they've suffered more in recent years because of what's been happening. The infrastructure is really, really pretty in disrepair. But there is a strong pushback towards that model. And the model in Iraq is, there's a number of different leading voices, and so they don't all agree. But in general, it would be fair to say that their model, following Sistani especially, is to be more neutral and not dictate to government what they should do. But they definitely have influence. And the president of Iraq, right after the U.S. left, was more of an outside voice. He wasn't probably giving enough legitimacy to the local Shia and Iraqi leaders. And so there's been tension there. I mean, they've had problems for some time. But interestingly, Muqtada al-Sadr, the guy I saw at Sistani's house, he asked his followers, I think it was Tuesday or Wednesday last week, to withdraw from the green zone where there was firing, and I think over 30 people died across the country of Iraq. And so it settled down. He exerted influence. He has quite a strong following, and so it's created at least non-confrontation right now. But there's still this sense that because they don't have a governing coalition yet in their form of government, and so they're still trying to figure out what they're going to do. But at least people aren't dying from these different groups that are vying for power. So there's the Iranian militia, there's the government of Iraq, and then there would be what we call Shia militias. So there's three streams of influence in that country, and they're trying to figure out how to go ahead. So just the practical question of what we can do, that's a tough one to answer. Just keep praying that cool heads prevail. And there is this sense that it also infiltrates into the Muslim community globally, because it's a Shia Sunni thing also, not entirely, but and how do our Shia friends believe that the government of Iraq should behave? You know, that's up for grabs, up for interpretation. So just be present, insert yourself in those relationships, ask how your friends, especially if they're from a Shia community, how they feel about it. Just listen really well. Pray a lot. And one last thing. One of the things I wanted to say, if I had the chance, was to apologize, ask forgiveness for our role within that country. Because I'm not detached. I'm a part of for better or worse, I'm an American citizen, so I need to not go and just kind of be this person who knows everything and from above kind of shares an opinion, but to humble ourselves. I think there's a viable role for Christians, especially if you're an American citizen, to acknowledge our error, the way in which we behaved. The premise of the shock and awe was a lie. We said there were weapons of mass destruction, and there never were. Saddam wasn't loved across the country. He was loved by some. There's winners and losers, but just to be humble in that also as an American citizen. Thank you for asking these questions and giving me a chance to share some of the stuff. The awareness that, one of the things that will stay with me for a while is to understand that some of our Muslim friends, they know God. They do. They just have a journey with God that I don't fully understand, fully get. I theologically have problems with, but it's not like we're starting from ground zero, I think would be one of the assumptions I now strongly believe. We're not starting from ground zero about spiritual things and how we walk with God. Jesus has a lot to say about that, but too often we approach it without much humility, and they need to hear and know Jesus, and which is what I believe. But we're not starting from ground zero.
Well, that was such a great conversation with Andy, and I think I'm looking forward to a part 2 with him where we can kind of even dive deeper into some of the things that he mentioned, like advocacy for our Muslim neighbors, and why is that important, and what does that look like? And some of the other things that has brought up, I think, yeah, we'll definitely have to do a part 2 and kind of delve into that a little bit more.
Yeah, that would be great. I would love to hear more of his perspective and experience on that. And so many things that he shared were inspiring to me and just fascinating. One thing I think that Andy shared that really has resonated with me is just and I don't know if I forget if the exact language that he used, but basically just the power of being present, um
Mm,
and the power of showing up in a space, and just thinking about how what a privilege it was, really, it sounds like, for him to visit Sistani's home and to be in that space, as yeah, I don't know if I would say especially as, but it, as a follower of Jesus, but to kind of be sharing space with somebody, and to recognize that this is a spiritual leader with so much wisdom, and just the power of being in the same room. I don't know. I've just been reflecting on that and thinking about how that might apply to us peace builders. What does it mean to show up
mm,
in our own spaces, in places where we might not completely align with other people in terms of you know religious ideology or life experiences. We're representing different communities, but just the beauty of being in one space and sharing a space. And so I think a practical illustration of that would, or just a practice of that, I guess, would be the peace feats that Andy was talking about, and how it sounds like rewarding that has been for him to facilitate. And the kind of paradigm shifting moments that he maybe has been part of, or has witnessed. So yeah, very, very inspiring.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking peace feast. So, um, yeah, that's such a great point, and yeah, really grateful for him and his life and all of the practical kind of takeaways that we have gotten to glean from him. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to podcasts. For more info about Peace Catalyst and to help support our peacebuilding work, please visit our website at peacecatalyst.org.